Hi, and welcome back to this series called the Unlast Days of Jesus. This is number 2 in the series. My name is Michael Venema, and this series is found on the channel 16 Minute Church, one of our playlists. So welcome, thanks so much for joining in. In the first, in this series, we looked at Jesus coming back to the city of Jerusalem. He'd kind of be in and out of the city for the next few days, but this would really be his last visit to the city, his last time there. It was not going to end well for him, at least in one respect, but there was a surprising ending. So we're going to continue on with this look of Jesus' last days, and to help us with that, we're really basing this short journey, so to speak, on Mark's version of Jesus' life. So last time we looked at chapter 11, where Jesus enters the city, and we're going to carry on with chapter 12, maybe some of 13, maybe some of 14. There's a lot of material there. There's a lot of things going on. I'll try and cover them in a way which keeps things moving and keeps things interesting. But I don't want to miss important things either, so we'll have to slow down here and there to catch up, to catch some important things that are going on. So in the first video, I sort of took it as the main theme there, that in that first section where Jesus enters Jerusalem, he ends up in a way triggering his own execution through the things that he does, where he generated a lot of offense. So I'm going to continue on with this, and we're going to start going to chapter 12. But before we do that, just the tail end of chapter 11, because as I said a second ago, Jesus ends up triggering his own execution by deeply offending the leadership and the religious leaders of the Jewish people back in Jerusalem at a time of heightened expectation and emotion, we might say. This all happens during one of the Passover celebrations, the most important celebration of the Jewish calendar then, and I'm pretty sure now as well. So Jesus has triggered a very difficult situation for himself by creating a lot of offense. So it's quite natural that in creating offense, that his opponents would be trying to, so to speak, shoot him in the ankles in different ways. And one of the things they try and do is to question his credentials. So at the end of chapter 11, they ask Jesus' enemies ask him, Jesus, by what authority are you speaking and acting like this? So Jesus has a question for them. He answers a question with a question. He likes doing that. And in this case, he asked them, well, let me ask you a question. John the Baptist, was he authorized by God, by heaven, or was he just authorized by humans, just speaking on his own or speaking with the encouragement of other people? Was it God, or was it human authority that he was using? So Jesus' enemies know that he has put them in a tough spot, because, and they discuss this among themselves in the narrative, what they say to themselves is, if we say that John the Baptist was authorized by heaven, then Jesus will ask us, then why didn't you listen to him? Because John the Baptist in turn also validated Jesus' work, and Jesus' enemies, of course, were not agreeing with Jesus' work. And they also say to themselves, if we say that John the Baptist was only speaking on human authority, well, then the crowds will be in an uproar, because the Jewish crowds were much in favor of John the Baptist and even more of Jesus. So they decline to answer Jesus' question. And so Jesus says, well, in that case, friends, I'm declining to answer your question. So this conflict between Jesus and the temple authorities and the leaders of the Jewish community and the Jewish faith continues on, and it escalates. In the next section, now we're starting to dip into chapter 12, Jesus tells a story, a parable, and it's a story of a man who owned a vineyard. He planted it and so forth, and he left it for his hired hands to take care of. Well, the owner sent first a servant and then his own son to the vineyard to have a look and see how things were going, and the hired hands beat them up. And Jesus, in telling this parable, is making it clear to his opponents that he is talking about them. In other words, the owner of the vineyard is God. The vineyard is the people of Israel. The hired hands are the leaders of the people, and they did not like the servants, the prophets back in the day. Neither do they like Jesus, and so they beat him up and killed him in the parable. And this, of course, is what's also in the works for Jesus. Now then, Jesus ends this little section by reminding his hearers of a saying that was back there in one of the prayers of the Old Testament. The stone that the masons threw out is now the cornerstone. This is God's work. We rub our eyes, we can hardly believe it. So the idea there is that the stone that now Jesus is shifting word pictures. He had once or a minute ago been thinking of the leaders as hired hands taking care of the vineyard. Now he is picturing them as stonemasons, and they are throwing out a stone. They're throwing Jesus out, and this stone will become the cornerstone. Now Jesus then, of course, is again saying something very disparaging about his enemies. He's using word pictures to elevate himself, suggesting that he's going to become the cornerstone that God is providing. His enemies, in the Bible version I've got, says they wanted to lynch him then and there, but they were intimidated by public opinion, but the public opinion of the crowds, and so they got out of there as fast as they could. Now Jesus spends time in the temple area, even though things are ratcheting up quite severely. And in the next section, the rest of chapter 12, he's going to take care of a couple of thorny questions. So one of them is, and this is something that Jewish people would have debated, should we pay taxes to Caesar? The idea was that Caesar was a Roman ruler, a pagan, not worthy of Jewish support. At the same time, the Roman authorities were paying for this astounding temple that was there for the Jewish people to use. And so there was kind of a conflict of sentiments and allegiances there at play. And so this question was there for the Jewish people. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? At least, should we pay them willingly? Because the Romans tended to extort from the people the taxes, so of course they hated the whole taxation system. And so this puts Jesus in kind of a tough spot, because if Jesus says no, we should not pay taxes to Caesar, then Jesus' enemies will have grounds to tell the authorities, hey, look at this kind of insurrectionist comment that Jesus made. Go and arrest him, which could definitely have happened. So Jesus could have answered no, and on the other hand, if Jesus had said yes, we should pay taxes to Caesar, then Jesus would have disappointed many of his followers. So what's he going to do? He says, show me a coin. They show him a coin. Whose picture is on that coin? Caesar's. Well, Jesus says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. So, pretty clever way to not, I would say, not get out of the question, not to sidestep the question, because Jesus leaves his hearers and he leaves us with the responsibility of figuring out what we should give to the government, what we should give to Caesar, and so forth. And he leaves with us the responsibility of discerning what it is we owe to God. So in not precisely answering the question, which was kind of a trick question, but he in not precisely answering it, he also leaves us with the task of sorting out these things and not expecting an easy answer. And this is probably a good and way for that discussion to have ended, because as times change, what God's people owe to the government, to the Caesars of the day, changes, and also as times change, the needs in God's work also change, and so what God requires of us can also change from time to time. So that, I think, was not just a clever answer in the way of shrewd or tricky, but also a very wise answer in leaving it open as to how that's going to be sorted out in each day. Now, the second debate that Jesus is going to take care of, there were a group of Jewish people called the Sadducees, and the Sadducees did not believe that people would be, they did not believe in the resurrection, that people would be raised from the dead. The Pharisees did, but the Sadducees did not. And so the Sadducees come to Jesus with a question about the resurrection. Now, I think that they maybe had this as a stock question, one that they had in their arsenal as a way to stump people who believed in the resurrection. Because they'd say, well, the resurrection, well, let's think about the resurrection for a minute. Let's say there's a woman, she's married to this man. The man dies before she does. Okay? Then she marries again. The second husband dies before she does, and then she marries again, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. By this time, if this was a typical TV show, a police or detective show, we'd be wondering how she's killing them off. But anyway, let's give the Sadducees their moment. They're asking this question. In the resurrection, whose husband is she going to be? Whose husband is she going to be? So, of course, the idea would be that this would be a very tricky question to answer. You probably couldn't answer it, so it makes the resurrection look kind of silly. Now, Jesus doesn't follow the pattern that they had hoped for, the way this conversation would unfold, because Jesus says, you Sadducees, you don't really know your Bibles very well. God says that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those folks have long left the scene, but he is their God. God is the God of not of the dead, but of the living. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob continue to exist and will also be brought back at the resurrection. That's the implication there. And and then also along the way, Jesus ends up saying that in the resurrection, all the marriage commitments that we had and so forth, they're going to be totally overshadowed by a new way of living. So Jesus handles that question not by providing sort of a tricky or a clever path out of it, but with some hardcore Jewish understanding of or at least the way the Jewish folks should have been understanding the future life, and also some hardcore Jewish understandings of God being the God of the living, and that includes some of those who have already died, but then of course they continue to exist. Now, Debate number 3. There were many commandments that the Jewish people had to adhere to. I'm not sure if all groups of Jewish people had to adhere to all the commandments. There were different commandments, I think, for priests and some for the Jewish men, maybe some for women. But nevertheless, there were a lot of commandments. I think that the tally is something like 613. I'm pretty sure that's the number. And so a significant question would be, what's the greatest commandment? Or maybe another question, is there even such a thing as the greatest commandment? Are all 613 of equal value? Or is there a hierarchy of commandments? So Jesus, what do you think? What is the greatest commandment? Jesus responds with a very famous Jewish expression. It's called the Shema. Listen, Israel, the Lord your God is one. And then Jesus continues with this expression from Deuteronomy in the Old Testament, chapter 6. Love the Lord your God with all your passion, prayer, intelligence, and energy. That's how my Bible version has it here. And then a second commandment is, this is from Leviticus chapter 9, love others as well as you love yourself. There is no other commandment that ranks as high as those two. So, again, Jesus is not responding in a tricky way this time, but just with some very straight up quotations from the Jewish scriptures, the very famous Jewish Shema, and then the great commandment, love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then one of the questioners is very taken by Jesus' responses. Well said, Jesus. And Jesus says to him, he says, you're almost there. You're right on the border of God's kingdom. So I think he's kind of suggesting to him, stay with me. Stay with me. And then this particular part ends with, after that, no one dared to ask Jesus any more questions. Now, this is interesting because now it turns out Jesus is going to ask a question. So he's got a question for these religion scholars, and the question goes back to an understanding that the Jewish people had about King David way back, their most famous king way back in the day, and the idea was that the chosen Messiah that God was going to bring about would be a descendant of David. The Messiah would be a descendant of David. And yet there's one of the Psalms where it says that the Messiah will call David Lord. It's David who will call his descendant, the Messiah, the Lord. So how is it? It seems backwards. David is the great ancestor of the Messiah, so David should be the Lord of the Messiah. But in this particular, these couple of lines, it's David ends up calling his own offspring, his own descendant, his own child, so to speak, Lord. How's that going to work out? And so Jesus, I think, leaves this question with his opponents and also with the crowds to think about, because as it turns out, as this is kind of a riddle, and Jesus doesn't answer it right away, but it will get answered as things unfold. Now, then we get to the end of chapter 12, and I think we're going to end it there because we're going to be getting on a ways in our video, and I don't want to make them too long. But one last thing before we finish with chapter 12, and that is this very famous story of Jesus. He's in the temple, he's still there, and he's watching people make donations. So there'd be a box, and there'd be opportunity for people to put something in the box. And some people made it clear, the rich made it clear, maybe not all of them, but that some of them would make it clear that what they were putting in was a nice chunk of change. And this is kind of a piece with the religious teachers who also like to be kind of showy, in their prayers, and like to be seen well dressed and like the praise of people. And so this is kind of part of the same trajectory, the showiness, wanting to be seen as a person of good reputation. And I've got a big donation. I'm gonna let people see that what I'm dropping into the box. So Jesus sees this, but he also sees a very poor woman, and she's got two small coins, and maybe it's all she's got. It may be her next meal that she's donating, but it's a very tiny amount. Let's say it's a couple of Canadian dollars, a couple of loonies, as we say in Canada, which is our $1 coin, because it's got the loon on it on the coin. So a couple of loonies, that's all she's got. And meanwhile, somebody else has just put in a check for $10,000. Jesus says, you know what? That poor woman put in more than the rich donor. Why? Because in God's sight, that gift of the woman was given out of her poverty and genuinely given because she meant it, and it was a sacrifice. It was from the heart. Whereas, when we have a lot of wealth and we're able to give from our wealth, it's nice, but it's giving out of your wealth is not quite the same kind of sacrifice as giving out of your poverty. So Jesus says, that woman gave more than the wealthy donor. Something to think about. Okay, Jesus is going to continue on, and in the next chapter 13, it's a bit more of a controversial chapter because it has a lot of pictures in it and expressions which some people like to treat as if they are descriptions of the last days of our current history. I don't think that's correct. So we'll take a look at that in the next video. In the meantime, be well, God bless you, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks again so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and hit the notification bell so that you will know about new videos coming out. See you next time.